Welcome to a brand new story, friends. In this episode, I'll be telling you the tale of the human ambassador James and the alien Queen Stella. Buckle up and enjoy the story. The alien queen sprained her ankle. I carried her in my arms, and the whole galaxy watched in shock. Neutral Station Halcyon had been engineered, at ruinous expense, to make everyone feel small. Its ceremonial hall was a cathedral of imported marble and borrowed starlight. A place where the ceilings soared so high that the air up there had its own weather, and where the acoustics had been tuned so that a dropped pin would sound like an accusation. James stood near the base of the grand processional stair in a borrowed dress uniform that fit him the way ambition fits a junior envoy, technically, and with a great deal of hidden pinching, and thought, not for the first time that day, that he would have traded 3 years of career advancement for a chair. The stair was the whole point of the evening. Every great power in the galaxy had agreed, after 11 months of negotiation conducted mostly by people who hated each other, to walk down it in a single ceremonial procession, in full view of every fleet, every crown, and roughly 900 billion viewers who had nothing better to do. The idea was that dignity was contagious. If the empires could be seen descending a staircase together without anyone declaring war on the landing, perhaps the watching worlds would believe peace was possible. James privately suspected that dignity was about as contagious as enthusiasm at a tax seminar. But nobody had asked him, because nobody ever asked the man whose job was to stand at the bottom and applaud on cue. "You're doing the face again," murmured Cora, his fellow envoy, out of the corner of her mouth. She had the enviable talent of appearing devout with reverence while whispering treason. "What face?" "The one where you're calculating how many of these people you could outrun." 14, James said. 15 if the Vosk ambassador's ceremonial train catches on something. The procession had begun. From the top of the stair, framed against a wash of projected nebula that some designer had clearly been very proud of, the great powers came down in slow, measured, self-important splendor. The Vosk delegation first, their exoskeletons polished to a mirror shine, moving with the grave solemnity of people who had rehearsed in front of an actual mirror and enjoyed it. Then the Kelry triarchs, then the machine choir of the Sodality, humming a chord that made James's fillings ache, then a dozen more, each crown descending at the pace of continental drift so the cameras could drink them in. And then, near the end, where the honor of the position had been fought over like a bone, came the Aurelian Throne. James had seen recordings of Queen Stella, of course. Everyone had. But recordings did not prepare a person. She came down the stair in a gown the color of deep water, her golden skin catching the false starlight, her long ears, the only thing about her a human eye would flag as truly other, swept back beneath a crown that looked less like jewelry and more like a small, extremely serious architectural project. She did not walk so much as occur. Around her the room seemed to lower its voice. Nobody touched the Queen of the Aurelian Throne. It wasn't a rule so much as a law of physics. 6 guards moved with her in a loose diamond, close enough to die for her and far enough to never presume, and the space around Stella had the untouched quality of a museum exhibit or a very expensive cake. James was, at that precise moment, thinking about the cake. There had been a rumor of a reception buffet, and he had eaten only a granola bar smuggled inside his ceremonial sash, some 4 hours prior, when the galaxy went wrong. It was such a small thing. The marble near the 10th step was polished to a lethal gloss, and someone had over-humidified the hall to keep the imported orchids happy, and the heel of Stella's ceremonial slipper. A slipper designed by people who had clearly never intended anyone to actually stand in it, met that gloss at an unkind angle. Her ankle turned. Her composure, that flawless, centuries-lacquered composure, cracked straight down the middle as her balance abandoned her, and for one suspended, horrible instant, the Queen of the Aurelian Throne pitched forward into empty air before 100 watching worlds. Her guards froze. This was the terrible truth of it. They froze, everyone, because their entire lives had been shaped around the single unbreakable principle that they did not, could not, must not touch her, and their bodies simply refused to solve a problem that reverence had never allowed them to imagine. Protocol froze. 900 billion viewers froze. The whole galaxy inhaled at once. James did not freeze. He was moving before the thought finished forming, and the thought, when it did catch up with him, was not about treaties or crowns or the ambassador who would certainly have a heart event about this later. It was, roughly, she's going to hit that step face first, and that is not acceptable. He crossed the gap that no one crossed, and got an arm behind her shoulders and the other beneath her knees. And he swept the falling queen up and clear as though she weighed nothing at all, carrying her 3 long strides away from the murderous marble before he even registered that he had done something no living being had ever dared. The hall made a sound like the universe forgetting its line. Stella's golden arms had caught around his neck by pure reflex, and her crown had gone slightly crooked, and her face, that unreadable sovereign face, was open now, cracked wide with plain astonishment, her deep eyes fixed on his from an intimate distance she had not chosen and could not remember ever occupying. Every camera in existence found them. Somewhere above, a nebula projection rotated obliviously on. James looked down at the most untouchable woman in the galaxy, held safe and startled in his arms, and heard his own voice say, with the calm of a man already too deep to swim back, "You all right up there?" By the time James had been marched to his own delegation's quarters, the clip had a name. Several names, actually, across as many languages. But the human networks had settled with dreadful speed on the carry, capital letters implied, and were replaying it at half speed with commentary from experts in fields that did not exist an hour ago. 3 separate governments issued formal statements before James had finished his first cup of the station's regrettable coffee. The Vosk called it an incident of grave irregularity. The Kelry called it regrettably tender. A minor human backwater whose entire economy was tourism called it, frankly, the most romantic thing to happen in the Halcyon system since the twin star eclipse, which did not help. Ambassador Owen was a man who had spent 40 years learning to keep his face still, and he was spending all of it now. He stood at the window with his back to James, watching the slow turn of the neutral station's docking ring, and when he finally spoke, his voice was the careful, level tone of a man diffusing something. "James, Ambassador, you are, as of 40 minutes ago, the most famous human in 4 systems." Owen turned. "For the wrong reasons. Do you know how rare that is? Most people have to work years to be famous for the wrong reasons. You managed it in the length of a staircase." "She was going to hit the marble, sir." "She was going to hit the marble," Owen repeated, as though tasting the sentence for poison. "Yes. That is what the entire galaxy watched you decide. Do you have any idea, any at all, how many centuries of Aurelian protocol you picked up and carried 3 steps to your left?" He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "Their court is drafting something. I can feel it. Somewhere on that ship, a very old man in a very expensive robe is drafting something, and it has your name in it, and it is not a thank you card." What Owen did not say, because he did not yet know it, was that Queen Stella had spent that same 40 minutes confined to a recovery couch in the Aurelian quarters, with her ankle wrapped in a med sleeve that hummed faintly as it knit the strain, staring at the ceiling and replaying, against every instinct she owned, the single most honest moment of her adult life. Not the fall, the catching, the absurd, unhesitating certainty of the arms that had caught her, the fact that in the whole shrieking history of her reign, no one had ever simply decided she should not be hurt and acted on it before asking permission. She had ruled since she was 19. She had been bowed to, negotiated with, poisoned twice, and proposed to for strategic reasons on 4 occasions. No one had ever picked her up because she was falling. It was, she thought with some alarm, a very stupid thing to keep thinking about. Her chamberlain, an ancient and immaculate personage named Vivian, who had served 3 monarchs and disapproved of all of them, stood at a respectful distance radiating disapproval like a small sun. "The court," Vivian said, "requests guidance, Majesty. There are factions who wish to demand the human censure, Some wish more than censure. And the summit? Vivian's silence was eloquent. The summit was the whole reason any of them were here, and it was, Stella knew, the only thing that actually mattered. The Meridian trade route, the ancient corridor of stable jump space that had threaded a dozen empires together for 800 years, was dying. Its lanes were destabilizing, the old gates failing faster than anyone could repair them, and whoever controlled what remained would control the throat of galactic commerce. Everyone wanted it. Everyone was one bad afternoon away from going to war over it. Halcyon was the last best chance to divide the dying route by treaty instead of by fleet. And now the entire fragile edifice of that chance was wobbling on the axis of a 15-second clip in which a human had held her arms. Which was why, some 3 hours later, James found himself escorted, flanked, really, into a small neutral chamber for what the station's diplomatic office was calling, with a straight face, a reconciliation audience. An apology, in other words. Mutual, staged, and witnessed, designed to let both sides pretend the whole thing had been resolved with dignity. Stella was already there, seated, her wrapped ankle propped with as much regal indifference as a person can project while icing a joint. She watched him come in. James, who had been coached for 90 minutes on exactly what to say, took one look at her and said none of it. "You're looking better," he offered. "The crown's on straight and everything." Vivian made a sound like a kettle achieving self-awareness. Something flickered at the corner of Stella's mouth and was ruthlessly suppressed. "Envoy James," she said, in a voice cut from cold glass. "I am given to understand you wish to apologize for laying hands on my person before 100 worlds." "I'm given to understand that too," James agreed. "I keep waiting to feel sorry about it. It hasn't come in yet. Might be a shipping delay." The glass cracked just slightly. "You are either very brave or very foolish. My performance reviews suggest I contain both," he said, in a ratio nobody's happy with. "But for what it's worth, Your Majesty, I'd do it again. You were falling. I don't much care whose protocol was in the way." And Stella, Queen of the Aurelian Throne, who had prepared a great many things to say, found for the second time that day that she had forgotten all of them. The diplomatic office, having decided that the galaxy could not be allowed to remember James and Stella only as the Carrie, resolved to bury the scandal under a great many wholesome images, and so the two of them were sentenced to a schedule: joint appearances, staged repair of the optics, a tour of the station's hydroponic gardens, a ribbon cutting for a shared research annex, a photographed handshake at the Meridian Route's central relay, all of it designed to broadcast the message that human and Aurelian could stand near each other without the universe ending. James privately thought that if the goal was to make everyone stop thinking about him holding the Queen, having the two of them appear together 40 times in a week was a bit like curing a hangover with a parade about drinking. But no one had asked him. They still didn't. The strange thing, the thing neither of them mentioned, was that the gaps were the best part. Not the staged smiles, which they both wore like ill-fitting coats, but the silences in the transport between one appearance and the next, when the cameras were off and there was nothing to perform. In those gaps, something warmer kept leaking through. "You do it wrong, you know," Stella told him in one such gap, watching the hydroponic light bleed green across the transport window. "The handshake. You look at the person instead of the lens." "I know," James said. "It's a character flaw. My mother raised me to look people in the eye. Ruins me for public life." "It reads as sincerity," she said, as though naming a disease. "Terrible habit. I'm seeking treatment." She almost smiled. He had learned to watch for the almost, the way the corner of her mouth would consider it, weigh the cost, and decline. She had a whole vocabulary of nearly smiles, each one a small state secret. He had made it a quiet, ridiculous personal mission to catch a full one before the summit ended. She showed him, in those gaps, things she had never intended to show a human. Not treaties, the weight of the thing. She had been crowned at 19, she told him, on a morning she barely remembered, into a role so old that the woman inside it had stopped being visible even to herself. The crown was not jewelry. It was a life support system for an idea, and the idea did not sleep, did not err, did not sprain its ankle on wet marble in front of 900 billion people. "Do you know what the worst part of the fall was?" she asked once very quietly, the regal glass gone from her voice. "Not the pain, being seen. The whole galaxy watched the Queen become a person for 1 second. My court has not forgiven me for it. I am not certain I am permitted to forgive myself." "For what?" James said. "For having an ankle? For being catchable?" He was quiet a moment. "Where I'm from," he said, "we've got a saying. Everybody trips. It's not much of a saying. It's not going on any monuments. But it turns out to be true across a real impressive number of star systems." He looked at her. At the person, not the throne, which she had noticed he did without seeming to decide to. "You tripped. Somebody caught you. That's not the Queen failing. That's just Tuesday for the rest of us." And there it was, a full smile, unguarded, startled out of her before she could file the paperwork to prevent it. It lasted less than a second. James felt as though he'd landed a probe on a comet. What neither of them saw in the warm privacy of those gaps was that the gaps were being watched. Deep in the Aurelian delegation, in a chamber that did not appear on any station map, a faction of the old court had convened around a very long table and a very old grievance. They were led by a lord named Adrian. Human-side observers kept getting confused by the name, which he found useful. A man whose family had grown rich on the wars the Meridian route made possible, and stood to grow poor on the peace this summit might broker. Adrian had watched the carry not with outrage, but with delight, because outrage was a resource, and here was an inexhaustible vein of it. A human had laid hands on the throne. The clip could be framed 100 ways, and Adrian had the money and the patience to frame it as an insult. A calculated human humiliation of Aurelian sovereignty, a species reaching up to grab a crown it had no right to touch. "The people love it now," one of his allies fretted. "The tenderness. The networks call it romantic. Love curdles," Adrian said, unbothered, turning a data crystal over in his fingers, so its stored footage caught the light. "Especially when you help it. Today it is romantic. Give me a week, and I will make the same 15 seconds mean conquest. A queen carried off, a throne handled. Pride is a fire, my friends. You need only feed it the right kindling and stand back." He smiled, which was worse than his frown. "They want a treaty that divides the root. I want the root whole and ours, and I want the war that makes it so. And it turns out the whole galaxy has already been handed the excuse. They simply don't know yet what they're angry about." He set the crystal down. "We'll tell them." 2 transports away, oblivious, Stella was laughing. Actually laughing. At something profoundly stupid James had said about the ceremonial slippers, and thinking, with the private alarm of a woman noticing weather change, that she had not laughed like this in years, and that it was becoming a problem she did not want to solve. The turn when it came was so smooth that James almost admired it. One morning the networks were cooing about the tenderness. By the next a new phrase had crept into the commentary like damp into a wall, the handling of the throne, and the same 15 seconds of footage now ran under grave voiceovers about dignity and sovereignty, and the long human habit of reaching for things that were not theirs. Someone had recut the carry so that James's face looked less like alarm and more like triumph. Someone had leaked a doctored historical analysis, claiming the human envoy had been positioned on that step deliberately. Aurelian citizens who had wept at the romance of it a week ago were now marching, and their signs, James noted with a sick lurch, had been printed by someone with real money and a good font. "This is manufactured," Stella said. They were in the neutral chamber again, but no cameras this time. She had come without her full retinue, which was itself a small scandal, and her ankle was healed enough now that she paced, which she did like a caged thing. "This does not move this fast on its own. Grief moves fast. Joy moves fast. But this is being steered." "Your court?" "My court," she said grimly. contains men who have made fortunes on the assumption that Aurelia and everyone else would be shooting at each other forever. The Meridian route splits the profit if we sign. It splits nothing if we go to war and take it all. She stopped pacing. Someone is spending a great deal of money to make the galaxy angry about the thing that saved my face, and they have been very careful to leave no signature. James, who had spent the previous night not sleeping and instead pulling every public data thread he could reach with a junior envoy's access, said, "Not no signature, just a small one." He set his slate on the table. The doctored footage, the recut with my conquest face, it went out through 14 different networks in 9 systems, all within about a 2-minute window, which is impossible unless somebody preloaded it and hit a single button, so I traced the preloads. They all route back through one relay license. He tapped the screen. A shipping concern. Bulk freight. Been operating on the Meridian route for 140 years, making a killing on wartime logistics. Owned at 3 removes by a holding trust registered under a name your people keep translating as Adrian. The temperature of the room dropped a degree. Lord Adrian, Stella said very softly, sat 2 seats from my left hand at the coronation of my father. Then he's had practice being close to the throne while wanting it dead. She should have looked frightened, and instead, she looked, for one blazing instant, purely furious in a way the crown never permitted. And James thought, entirely at the wrong moment, that he had never seen anything so alarming or so magnificent. He filed the thought away for a decade or so. The relay license was only the thread. The thing it was tied to turned out to be worse. Chasing it into the station's underbelly, the maintenance decks where Halcyon's borrowed grandeur gave way to honest pipework and the hum of the reactors that kept 900 billion viewers in high definition. They found what Adrian's money had actually bought. Not just a slander campaign. An incident. On the final day of the summit during the closing ceremony that would be broadcast to every screen in the galaxy, the Meridian Central Relay, the very relay James and Stella had shaken hands in front of for the cameras, was slated to suffer a catastrophic, spectacular, entirely engineered failure. A jump gate cascade, dressed up to look like human sabotage. The route would die live, on air, with a human's fingerprints planted all over the wreckage. There would be no treaty after that. There would only be the war Adrian had already sold futures on. He's not disrupting the summit, James said, staring at the schematics they'd pulled from a maintenance node that was absolutely not supposed to contain them. He's going to blow up the reason for the summit and blame my whole species for it while the galaxy watches. And me beside you, Stella said. The Queen the human handled. The insult made literal. My court will not need to argue for war. The footage will argue for them. She was quiet. Then, with the particular gallows steadiness of a person who has just understood the size of the thing. We have 3 days. They stood too close in the dim of the maintenance deck, the reactor hum in the walls, the whole absurd, fragile piece of the galaxy resting on 2 people who officially were not even supposed to be alone together. And James, who had promised himself he would keep the ridiculous thought filed for a decade, discovered that decades have a way of arriving early. For what it's worth, he said, and the timing's terrible, I know. I stopped doing this for the optics about 4 appearances ago. Stella looked at him. The furious magnificence had gone soft and startled, the way it had on the stair, the day the whole galaxy watched her forget to be a queen. James, she said, and it was not the glass voice. We are about to try to stop a war. I know. You choose now. I contain bravery and foolishness, he reminded her gently, in a ratio nobody's happy with. And she laughed, one broken, disbelieving, wholly real laugh in the belly of the station, and did not, he noticed, say that he was wrong. They had 3 days, and Adrian had 140 years of infrastructure, which is the sort of arithmetic that keeps junior envoys awake. Going to the authorities was out. Adrian's money had already seeded doubt in every official channel, and any accusation from the human who handled the Queen would land as a desperate man deflecting blame. Going to Stella's court was worse. Half of it was in Adrian's pocket, and the other half wouldn't move without proof stamped, sealed, and witnessed by someone they trusted, which described precisely nobody in the room. So they did the only thing left to two people with no allies and a deadline. They decided to catch him in the act, live, in front of the exact audience he wanted. The plan was held together by optimism and one genuinely good idea. The engineered relay failure needed a trigger, a signal sent from somewhere on the station at the ceremony's peak, timed to the broadcast so the cascade would bloom on every screen at once. If they could find the trigger point and hold it, and if they could get the truth onto the same feed Adrian intended to poison, then the weapon he'd spent a fortune building would go off in his hand instead. Cora, who had spent the week pretending not to notice her colleague falling in love with a head of state, turned out to be worth 10 allies. She got them access to the broadcast relay under the cover of final ceremonial rehearsal, and asked no questions except, "Am I going to prison for this?" To which James said, "Probably not," and she said, "Unacceptably vague," and helped anyway. The closing ceremony assembled in the great marble hall beneath the same oblivious nebula projection, every crown and camera in the galaxy trained once more on the grand processional stair. Adrian was there in the Aurelian delegation, immaculate, patient, a man watching a machine he'd built for 140 years finally come to term. At the appointed moment, deep in the station's bones, a signal woke and began its countdown toward the meridian relay. It got 4 seconds in before it hit James, who was lying under a conduit access panel he was absolutely not cleared to open, holding 2 wires apart with a granola bar wrapper because it was the only non-conductive thing in his ceremonial sash. "The wrapper's holding," he reported into his earpiece with the strained cheer of a man whose entire species' reputation currently depended on snack packaging. For the record, 40 years of human food safety regulation just saved galactic peace. Somebody write that down. "The signal's rerouting," Cora's voice crackled. "He built redundancy. It's finding another path. James, it's going to fire from the relay itself. You can't stop that from down there." "No," said a third voice on the channel, cool and certain. "But I can stop it from up here." Because Stella was not hiding. Stella was walking. She crossed the great hall in full view of the assembled galaxy, away from her guards, away from her retinue, away from every rule that had governed every step of her life. And she walked to the human at the base of the stair as he hauled himself out of the access panel, wrapper still in hand, and she stopped beside him. Beside, not above. A queen no one was permitted to touch, standing shoulder to shoulder with a human before 900 billion watching eyes, and turning to face the delegation she had ruled her whole life. "Lord Adrian." Her voice filled the tuned acoustics of the hall like water filling a bell. "In 4 seconds you intend to destroy the Meridian Relay, murder the summit, and blame the human envoy for a crime you have paid 140 years to commit." She lifted her hand, and in it, Cora's uploaded proof, the relay license, the preload records, the trigger schematic, blooming now onto every screen that had been reserved for Adrian's lie. "The galaxy watched a human carry me. Now let them watch what an Aurelian lord tried to build on top of it." The countdown reached 0. Deep in the station, the trigger fired into a circuit James's snack wrapper had held open just long enough for Cora to sever, and the cascade that should have killed the root died instead, a firework that never left the ground. On every screen in the galaxy, the doctored footage of conquest was replaced by the naked schematic of a war for sale. Adrian's composure held for exactly as long as it took him to understand that the machine had gone off in his hand. Then it did not hold at all. He reached, absurdly, for the manual override on his own slate and found that the throne's true guards, the ones loyal to the woman and not the crown's oldest money, had already closed around him, because a queen who walks unguarded across a hall in front of the galaxy is a queen making a very public, very deliberate choice about whom she trusts. And every honest soul in that delegation had just watched her make it. In the ringing silence that followed, Stella turned to James. The whole galaxy was still watching. She seemed, for once, entirely unbothered by that. "You held the wire apart," she said, "with a snack wrapper, It was a very well-engineered wrapper. "You are," she informed him in the glass voice, which had somehow become the warmest thing he knew, "the single most foolish person I have ever permitted near my throne." "And the bravery?" he asked. The corner of her mouth considered it, weighed the cost, and, before all the crowns and cameras and shocked, silent worlds, declined to decline. The treaty was signed 11 days later, and it was, by the frank assessment of everyone present, the least dramatic thing to happen on Halcyon in a month, which was precisely the point. The great powers filed into the marble hall. The same lethal stair, though someone had finally thought to lay down textured runners, a reform James liked to think of as his true diplomatic legacy, and divided the dying meridian route not by fleets but by clauses, lane by lane, gate by failing gate, each empire taking responsibility for the stretch it could actually keep alive. The old corridor would not last forever, nothing did, but it would last long enough, and it would die by inches in peace rather than all at once in fire, which is the most any road can ask. Adrian did not attend. Adrian was, at that hour, explaining 140 years of shipping ledgers to an Aurelian tribunal, and the tribunal was unmoved by his font choices. His faction collapsed the way such things always do once the money stops believing in them, not with defiance but with a stampede of former loyalists, suddenly and loudly discovering they had always found him distasteful. The wartime holding trust was broken up and its assets turned, at Stella's specific and slightly vengeful insistence, toward funding the very gate repair work that would keep the route open. James thought there was a fine, dry justice in a man's war fortune being spent forever on peace, and said so, and Stella said the crown did not traffic in irony, and then smiled in a way that trafficked heavily in it. The galaxy, for its part, had performed a full and shameless reversal, as galaxies do. The same networks that had recut the carry into conquest now ran it a third way, under swelling music, as the moment a human first reached across the gap that a lord had tried to turn into a wall. James was informed he had a fan club. James asked to be uninformed. Cora, who had helped commit approximately 9 counts of unauthorized access to a broadcast relay, was not imprisoned, but quietly promoted, on the sensible logic that talent like that was better inside the tent. And she accepted the promotion with the words, unacceptably vague, "But I'll take it," which James suspected she'd been saving. He had changed, and he knew it, which is the rarer half of changing. The man who had stood at the bottom of that stair a month ago had been waiting his whole career for someone to ask him, waiting for permission, for a title, for the standing to matter. He did not wait for permission anymore. He had learned, in the space of a staircase and a snack wrapper and a queen who walked unguarded across a hall, that the moments that actually mattered never came with a form to fill out first. You simply saw the person falling and decided they should not be hurt. And you moved. It had cost him his anonymity and nearly his career, and briefly the goodwill of 900 billion strangers. He would have done all of it again. That, it turned out, was the whole of what he'd become. A man who would do it again. Stella found him afterward on an observation deck that looked out over the docking ring, where the assembled fleets were peeling away one by one into the dark, crowns going home. Her ankle was long-heeled. Her crown was slightly crooked, and James had come to understand that she left it that way, now on purpose. A small daily sabotage of the woman who had been crowned at 19 and had not been permitted to trip since. "They're already asking," she said, coming to stand beside him. She still did that. What it means. A human and the Aurelian Throne. The commentators have theories. Some of them are very confident. Are any of them right? 1 or 2, she admitted, which is unbearable. So I've decided they're all wrong. He laughed. Out beyond the glass, a Vosk cruiser lit its drive and slid away, dignity intact, having declared war on no one. The summit had held, the road would live, and the most untouchable woman in the galaxy was standing close enough that he could see the almost smile arrive at the corner of her mouth, weigh the cost of the whole ridiculous, impossible thing, and, as it had been doing more and more lately, to the ruin of centuries of protocol, decline to decline. "There's a reception," she said. "On the lower hall. Another stair. They've made me lead the procession again. Tradition." She turned to face him, and there was something in it of the stair, of the fall, of the first honest second of her adult life. "I find I am concerned about the marble." "They put down runners," James said. "I know." She held his eyes. "I intend to trip anyway." And she stepped off the edge of the deck's low riser, a small step, a nothing step, a queen tipping herself deliberately off balance in front of a man she trusted more than her own crown. And James was already there, because of course he was, sweeping her up into his arms as easily as breathing, as if the whole month had only been practice for doing on purpose what he'd once done on instinct. Her golden arms came around his neck. Her crown went crooked. Somewhere below, a hall full of cameras was waiting to catch the queen of the Aurelian Throne descending in careful, measured dignity, and would instead catch her carried, laughing, by the human who had never once stopped to ask if he was allowed. The galaxy would watch in shock, again. She had, this time, chosen it. They gave her a crown when she was 19, and for years no one ever caught her, because no one was allowed to, and after a while, no one imagined she could fall at all. That is the strange loneliness of being untouchable. You are surrounded, and no one reaches for you. You are adored, and no one worries you might get hurt. Stella ruled a throne the whole galaxy revered, and not one soul in it had ever simply decided she should be safe. It took a stumble on wet marble to change that. 1 second of being seen, not as a queen, but as a person who trips, the way all of us trip, and a man who didn't stop to ask whether he was permitted to care. So maybe the question the story leaves us with is a quiet one. Who in your life do you treat as untouchable, too composed, too strong, too high up to ever need catching? The friend who always has it handled, the parent who never falters, the person you assume would find your concern insulting. How long has it been since anyone reached for them? And the harder question, turned the other way. Where are you still waiting for permission? Waiting for the title, the standing, the right moment, the sign that says you're finally allowed to move. James spent a whole career waiting to matter, and learned, in the length of a staircase, that the things that matter most never come with a form to sign first. You see someone falling. You decide. You move. The galaxy watched in shock because it had forgotten something simple. That reaching across the gap, before you're sure you're allowed, isn't a breach of the rules. Sometimes it's the only thing that was ever holding us together. So the next time someone near you stumbles, don't wait to be told it's your place. Just catch them. The end. We've reached the end of another sci-fi traveler story, friends. Don't forget to like the story, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next one. See you in the next sci-fi traveler story.